Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Focal Points. Today, our special guest is retired Air Force Major Tom Haviland, and he has conducted what's called the Worldwide Embalmer White Fibrous Clot Survey to see exactly how many embalmers across the world are actually finding these anomalous white clots in deceased individuals, which we now understand to likely be infectious amyloids or novel prion-like disease. So, Tom, why don't you give our audience a bit of background about yourself, and then we'll dive into these worldwide surveys.
Sure, Nick. First of all, I want to thank you for having me on the show. I've been following your work, and I'm a big fan of it. Also, of course, a big fan of Dr. Peter McCullough. He's been so gracious to me. A lot of times he'll go on shows and I'll contact him right after that and say, hey, I'd like to go on that show too. And he's been gracious enough to give me the contact information for those other hosts. So I followed him on a lot of shows I've gone on. So thanks to Dr. Peter McCullough for that. I also want to say before we get started, a great thank you to my assistant in all this effort, Miss Laura Kasner. She has been my partner in all this, and she's the expert in SurveyMonkey that puts the questions into SurveyMonkey for me. Also has lots of great ideas about what we're doing with the surveys. And she also runs a fantastic free Substack called Clotastrophe. We affectionately call it Clotastrophe. And you can find that at laurakasner.substack.com. And it's, like I said, it's free. So please subscribe to it and check out all of our work. But yeah, I'm a retired Air Force Major, Nick, and spent 20 years in the Air Force. And then 16 years after that as a defense contractor working with the Air Force. I'm an electrical engineer and data analyst. I have a bachelor's in mathematics from the Ohio State University, a bachelor's in electrical engineering from Louisiana Tech University, and a master's in computer resources and information management from Webster University in St. Louis. And I've been a data geek all my life, and that's what I did mostly in the Air Force. But it all came to a grinding halt, Nick, in October 2021. I was a defense contractor working at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio. And that's when Joe Biden came out with the vaccine mandates. And, you know, it wasn't just for the military and the government civilians, but also us defense contractors, too. I was working on the base at the time. And a 3-star Air Force general, Nick, had come out with an email to the entire base telling everybody the dates they'd have to get their shots by or else get kicked out. And he kind of tried to guilt us into getting the shot. He said, we've lost too many unvaccinated airmen. So I sent him back an email, Nick. Remember, this is an Air Force 3-star general. And I said, shame on you. You failed us. Instead of standing up for our right to decide for ourselves whether or not to take an experimental drug, you chose to spend your time trying to guilt us into taking the jabs. Shame on you. And I didn't just send that email to him, Nick. I CC'd all 30,000 people that work at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So I knew what was going to happen. I got a call a half hour later from my boss of the defense contractor I worked for, and I was fired from my $165,000 a year job as an engineer for shaming the Air Force 3-star in front of the entire base. But somebody had to do it. None of the colonels, none of the generals were pushing back on what we now know is an unlawful order, right? Pete Hegseth came out a couple of weeks ago and admitted that it was indeed an unlawful order to make you take an experimental drug against your will. So I'm glad I did it. I'd do it again. But it turned out to be a blessing in a way because it then gave me the time. I went into early retirement to allow me to do these 3 worldwide embalmer blood clot surveys.
Wow. Well, you're so brave for doing that, honestly. So everybody who worked there at Wright-Patterson, they all saw the email. Wow. And so, but your instincts were absolutely correct. I mean, you were probably the smartest person at that base for refusing these experimental genetic countermeasures that were being forced on you. And so I really do applaud you for being so brave. And so, yeah, let's get into this survey now. So which one should we go through first?
Let's start with the Worldwide Embalmer Blood Clot Survey. This one is we did in November of 11th through the 14th of December of 24. Now, the first 2 surveys that we did, we started in 2022, actually, Nick. And in that survey in 2022, there were 3 main conclusions of that survey. We had 179 responses to that first survey, and of those, 119 the embalmers, almost exactly 66%, said they were indeed seeing the white fibrous clots. And also the main consensus of the embalmers was that they started seeing them in the year 2021 after the COVID-19 vaccines rolled out, which I thought was very interesting. The third and maybe most surprising result of that first survey was that the embalmers said they were seeing these clots, Nick, in 30% of their corpses. 30%. So this thing is not a rare phenomenon. These things are quite prevalent. So that shocked me when we got that. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide here. I think I can control them, right?
Yes, it should let you.
Yeah, so one of the first questions, by the way, in the surveys we ran, when we ran each of the 3 surveys for the 3 years, we used a 2-pronged approach to distribute them. I sent them to 50 national, regional, and state funeral director associations all around the world, each with hundreds of members underneath them, and I asked them to distribute the survey down to their active embalmers. We sent them an email that had a link to a SurveyMonkey survey. It only takes about 3 to 4 minutes to take. Very simple, easy. And we tried to gear the questions that we knew the embalmers could answer, like, what are you seeing? When did you see it? And how much? What percentage of your corpses are you seeing this phenomenon in? And so we tried to stay away from questions we knew they couldn't answer, like how or why the clots are forming. That's for the scientists like Greg Harrison, to figure out. So in this survey, and also at no point, by the way, in any of the questions to the embalmers, do we ever mention the words COVID or COVID vaccine? So we stayed totally unbiased. We didn't want to lead the witness. So in this survey here, in this third one here in 2024, we asked the question 2 was, did you observe any large whitish fibrous structures, clots, as seen in the photo above? And we always give them a photo to look at because we wanted them to distinguish between traditional grape jelly clots. Embalmers have been seeing those forever. They look just like dark grape jelly and they dissolve easily in your hands. We also wanted to make sure they didn't confuse these with what's called chicken fat clots, which are small, yellowish in color, and tear very easily. Much different than these large white fibrous clots that are real tough and rubbery. So we asked them if you've seen the white fibrous clots in the year 2024. And look at that, Nick. Out of the 301 embalmers that responded to this year's survey, 250 of them, 83%, said they were seeing the white fibrous clots in the year 2024. And that's actually
increased.
Yeah. Richard Hirschman and I aren't sure if it's really increased or maybe the embalmers now, as this thing is getting into its 4th year, maybe they're more willing now to admit that this phenomenon is actually happening. So more embalmers have seen them. So we suspect that may be what's at play here.
That makes sense.
The next question we asked is, what percentage of the corpses in the year 2024 that you've embalmed have had the whitish fibrous structures, clots? And if you do a weighted average of all those bars, including the green bar where 43 embalmers said they saw none, you get a weighted average of 27.5% of the corpses in the year 2024. And that's a bad sign because in the year 2023 survey, it was actually had gone down to 20%. So now we're going in the wrong direction again. So that actually kind of surprised me and alarmed me a little bit. If you look over there on the left, you see 98 of the embalmers said they were seeing the clots between 1 to 20% of their corpses. 74 embalmers seeing it between 21 to 40% of the corpses. 55 embalmers seeing the white fibrous clots between 41 to 60% of their corpses in 2024. Even 23 that said they were seeing between 61 to 80% of their corpses. So as I said, these things are not rare. They are quite prevalent. In fact, Richard Hirschman on his phone, this was about a year ago, he said, Tom, I got over 250 photos from over 250 different corpses of the white fibrous clots. So yeah,
they're finding them. They're finding them. It's there. It's real. It's
definitely there. The next question we asked was, did you see the large whitish fibrous structures, clots, in a higher percentage of corpses in 2024 than you did in 2023? And this is kind of another way of asking that last question again to see what the trend is. And that's because I knew that the different embalmers were answering the survey this year as opposed to last year. Interestingly, in my 2023 survey, Nick, my main participant was the Pennsylvania Funeral Directors Association. When I had sent out that survey back in December of 2023, about 5 days in, I only had about 14 responses to that survey. And I said, I need more responses than that. I had all the phone numbers of all the presidents of funeral director associations here in the United States. I sent the survey to the top 30 states by population. So I called all of them that day, and I talked to the folks at the Pennsylvania Funeral Directors Association, asked them to forward my survey to their embalmers, and I know they did that because when I checked my Survey Monkey collectors the next 2 days, the first day I'd gotten 93 more responses, all from Pennsylvania embalmers. And then the day after that, I got 32 more responses, again from Pennsylvania embalmers. So in just 2 days, I got a total of 125 responses from embalmers in just that one state in that 2023 survey. And it told me a couple of things, first of all. It told me, first of all, that the embalmers, they want to tell you what they're seeing in the embalming room, but if they think they have the permission from either their funeral director boss or their state funeral director association. But it also told me, hey, there was, 29 other funeral director associations I sent that survey to. How come they didn't respond? So, there's this reluctance still to respond to these surveys. So as you can see on this slide here, when I asked the question for about 2024 versus 2023, the longest bar is about the same. And then you see 59 said they saw less clots in 2024, and 47 said they saw more clots in 2024. So it's about a wash on that. The next question we asked is, and we wanted this year to start to get into the psychology a little bit of it. The first couple of years, we just asked primarily hard data numbers about the white fibrous clots, and as you'll see in a minute, microclotting, which is another phenomenon. But this year, we decided to ask a few more questions to kind of delve into the psyche of the embalmers and see what's going on there in terms of the reluctance to answer the survey. So we asked them, do other embalmers that you talk to say that they're seeing the large whitish fibrous structures clots? As you see there, the longest bar is yes. About 60% of the embalmers said yes, 185 out of the 301. So that tells me, Nick, that they are seeing the clots and they're talking to each other privately about it, but very few, as you know, have come out publicly. Just people like Richard Hirschman, a funeral director over in the UK, Mr. John O'Looney, and several others have come forward, but not many, right?
Right.
So
they're finding them and they're talking to each other and they're worried. They're like, what are these that we're finding in these deceased people? And like look at there, 66 don't even talk about it. Yeah, so they're probably afraid,
Yeah, what's up there? Has their funeral director boss told them you're not supposed to talk about this? I suspect that may be the case.
Right.
Another question we asked them is, did you observe any microclotting in the corpses that you embalmed in the year 2024, as evidenced by the appearance of coffee grounds or dirty blood in the drainage? The embalmers in the 2023 survey, they told me, hey, Tom, you need to ask a question about this microclotting phenomenon. And they describe it as what looks like coffee grounds in the blood or dirty blood. And that's, an indication of this phenomenon called microclotting. And this, by the way, embalmers had seen prior to 2020, prior to COVID, but in way less than 5% of their corpses, typically in patients that had heavy chemotherapy. So it wasn't too surprising that a large number, 78% of the embalmers said they were seeing the microclotting phenomenon in 2024. But what is surprising is the percentage of corpses they're seeing it in. If you look over there in the red on the right, if you average all those bars together, again, including the green bar where 52 embalmers said they saw none, you get a weighted average of 22% of the corpses in 2024 containing this microclotting phenomenon. So and that's down slightly from last year survey of 25%, but still it's a quadrupling, Nick, of what they were saw prior to COVID. So it's not a good trend at all. And as you know, microclotting can be very dangerous as well because it blocks the exchange of oxygen at the lungs, then the carrying that oxygen to all the major organs of your body, including your brain, your eyes. That might be why people are experiencing brain fog or having vision problems. A lot of people have been having vision problems as well.
Yeah, we definitely know these shots create clotting syndromes, and that's actually one of the main causes of death from these vaccines is hematological system damage. And so that's definitely expected that we would see this. Now, I guess with these microclots as well, that could be caused by SARS-CoV-2 as well. But regardless, it's so concerning that we're seeing that increase, drastic increase since 2020, 2021.
Absolutely. One of the next questions we asked the embalmer, again, a psychological question, is, hey, have you watched any of the online videos, such as the died suddenly video? You know, that's what got me started in this, by the way. I was watching that died suddenly movie in my retirement. And it's, you know, for your folks that are not familiar with it, it's about an hour-long documentary, and people can still find it on Rumble. And I know there's some problems in the movie, Nick, but at the 13-minute and 15-second mark, an amazing statement was made in that movie. An embalmer from the state of Indiana, Mr. Wallace Hooker, was lecturing at an Ohio Embalmers Association conference in Columbus, Ohio, on the 26th of October in 2022, and he was lecturing to a room of 100 embalmers. And he showed them photographs of the white fibrous clots he had been pulling out of his corpses for about the last year at that time. And he asked them by a show of hands, how many of you are seeing these same white fibrous clots? And he said almost the entire room of 100 embalmers raised their hands yes. Wow. He then asked, when did you start seeing them? And they said it was in the middle of 2021. They all agreed it was in the middle of 2021, about 6 months after the vaccines rolled out. So, you know, whatever else happened in that movie, either that statement's true or false, right? Either those embalmers raised their hands or they didn't. So I got up the next day, it was Tuesday of the week of Thanksgiving of 2022, the day after the movie premiered. And I said, you know, I don't think any reporter is going to chase after this story. So I myself call the Ohio Embalmers Association. They're located in Cincinnati, about an hour south of where I live in Dayton, Ohio. And I talked to their president, Mr. Dan Becker, their vice president, Mr. Woody Wilson, and their secretary, Mr. David Hicks. And I asked all three gentlemen, hey, did you happen to be in the room at the time that those embalmers supposedly, you know, raised their hands? Well, none of the three of them happened to be in the room at the time, Nick. However, the vice president, Mr. Woody Wilson, who is now the president of the Ohio Embalmers Association, and he also runs his own funeral home up in Marysville, Ohio, about an hour north of where I live. And Woody does his own embalming. A lot of funeral directors do their own embalming. Woody told me, Tom, I'm seeing the white fibrous clots too. So that was my wow moment, right? I now had an official officer, the now president of the Ohio Embalmers Association, corroborating these 6 or 7 embalmers in this died suddenly movie that he's seeing the clots too. So that's when I decided right away to do this nationwide survey, which I later on turned into a worldwide survey by including Canada, UK, and Australia, New Zealand. Because, Nick, I knew that the FDA and the CDC were not going to track this. They weren't even acknowledging the clots, let alone tracking them. So I said, well, if they're not going to do it, then I guess myself as a private citizen is going to have to track this. Otherwise, we're not going to have any access to this data.
So you have done the CDC's work these past few years. You have literally single-handedly done their work. You're right. They should have been doing this. They should have been tracking it. They should be going to every single funeral home, finding out the vaccination status of these deceased, finding out the exact number of how many people have these clots, because this is truly worrisome. I mean, this is such a large proportion of embalmers that are seeing these clots that only appeared after 2021. And, you know, it's just, you know, I guess people have to take this particular situation more seriously because we don't know much about it, and it's extraordinarily serious.
Absolutely. And what makes it even more frustrating is even if the CDC and the FDA were not tracking it, what about the funeral director associations themselves? For example, I've tried to get the British Institute of Embalmers for the last 3 years to take the survey. They refused to take my survey. But if you go on their website, Nick, you'll see that they have a code of ethics. And key point number 4 under their code of ethics is they're supposed to do their own research whenever they see something unusual happening in the area of embalming. Well, I'll tell you, these white fibrous clots are very unusual. In fact, the embalmers tell me that, you know, when they find a body riddled with the clots, it takes them about an extra hour to do an embalming. You know, instead of an hour to an hour and a half that it used to take prior to COVID, now it's taking 2 to 2.5 hours to do an embalming when they find a body riddled with the clots. So I think these organizations are violating their very own code of ethics by not taking the survey. And we'll see in the second survey I'll run you through in a few minutes here. The same thing is happening with vascular surgeons and cath lab workers across the United States as well. They're not talking about this. They're not surveying their people, even though we know that these things are also being found in the living, Nick. So getting back to this slide here, when we asked the embalmers, have you watched any of these videos, such as Died Suddenly, or read articles, or watched interviews like you and I are doing right now? Only about a third of the embalmers, 96 out of the 301 responding, said that they are. So it's strange to me, because this is something definitely affecting their work. And 83% of them said they were seeing the clots. It's not like so you would think that a much larger percentage of them would be wanting to study what's going on here. Very unusual.
They're probably so demoralized. They keep seeing them corpse after corpse. They're like, all right, I don't even know what to think anymore.
Well,
I don't know.
No, I agree with you. I think it has taken a psychological toll on them, because especially they're seeing a lot younger people these days actually winding up on their embalming tables too. People that have died suddenly that should have been young and healthy, but then they're riddled with these clots. So it's taken a big toll on them. And in terms of psychology, one of the reasons I think that the funeral directors are so reluctant to take the survey and pass it down to their active embalmers to take is the fact that a couple of things are going on here. As we know, about 80% of American adults over the age of 18, according to the CDC, took at least their first 2 jabs, COVID jabs. So there may be some cognitive dissonance going on in their own mind. They may not want to know the answers to these questions. And then secondly, would you want to participate in a survey if you had mandated that all your employees of your funeral home take the COVID-19 vaccine? These funeral directors might be setting themselves up for a lawsuit, right? If one of the people in their funeral home gets injured by the jabs. So that could be, so that could play a part as well. No surprise on this question here. We asked the embalmers, are you a member of a professional embalmer or funeral director association? As you can see there, well over 80%, 246 of 301 are. We kind of asked them that question and set up something up for the next question. This one is, has your professional embalmer or funeral director association ever discussed the large whitish fibrous structures clots? As you see there, only 52 said yes out of the 301. So less than 20% of the funeral director associations around the world are actually talking about these unusual clots. And they have plenty of opportunity. Most of them have annual conventions, or they have monthly or quarterly newsletters that they can talk about this. In fact, the good news here, Nick, is the dam's breaking a little bit. I'll be going in about a month from now on June 8th. I've been invited by Mr. Taylor Moore, who's the president of the Tennessee Funeral Directors Association, to brief the results of my surveys and also talk to the embalmers about how the clots are forming, what they're made of, based upon Greg Harrison's work. So that's good news. I think now that we're 4 years into this, they're starting to realize, hey, these things are not going away. They're still around. We need to acknowledge this and actually do something about it.
That's huge. That's awesome news that they did invite you, and that's great. You'll be able to interact with these embalmers, and I wonder what they're gonna say up now in 2025 at this point. And like your survey showed, the fact that they're seeing more this year than last year, that means, like, does this pathology, is it permanent in people? So this is again, this is really important to be looking at.
Yeah, and that's exactly what and I hear Dr. McCullough talk a lot about. He's concerned about whether the production of the spike protein by the mRNA is going to be permanent in somebody. Because we now have a very high estimation that they do indeed reverse transcribe into the genome. We now have 3 independent data sources suggesting that. And so, very, very worrisome. And that could explain a lot of this. It does get in. And then if their cells are forever spike production factories, it's no wonder that they would have such unidentified strange syndromes, strange structures that are growing inside of them. I know. It's shocking, isn't it? At the end of each of our surveys, like I said, in the survey questions nor in the instructions do I ever mention the words COVID or COVID vaccine, but we allow the embalmers to make comments at the end of the survey, and a lot of them actually wind up talking about the vaccines, either accusing the vaccines, implicating them of causing the clots, or sometimes you'll run into embalmers that actually defend the vaccines and say they're not causing the clots. So let's just run through a couple of the embalmers' comments. There are about 80 of them came into this latest survey out of the 301 embalmers that responded. Here's the first one from Georgia. Majority of cases of decedents I've embalmed who present the large white fibrous clots were in the age range from late 50s to early 70s. Microclotting and grape jelly type clotting have been observed almost on every case who have hospitalized prior to death. Here's the next one from Kentucky. I've been an embalmer since the early 2000s for an embalming service. I've never seen anything like this before the spring of 2021. I have experienced the white fibrous clots that have stretched out to 20 inches. It's like battling a rubber band. My right hand and elbow has suffered from these clots. I've been saying for the last 3 years, this isn't normal. I've recently spoken with a physician that's been hearing this in his field. We are in the same agreement that we feel we know where this has come from. And I think he's talking about the vaccine there without mentioning the word vaccine.
Oh, yeah.
I'll read a few more of these. Now, here's one with a different opinion, Nick. This is an embalmer from Canada. It says, since the beginning of the COVID-19 vaccine or COVID-19 pandemic, which I assume this survey is pertaining to, I have not noticed any clots, fibrous structures, or contents in the blood outside the ordinary. It is also not our responsibility as embalmers to take note of these cases, record or share any information, as it is confidential medical information that breaches the privacy clause we have with our client families. Videos and articles such as died suddenly are anti-vaccine, COVID-denying propaganda that is based in no actual fact other than to spread right-wing beliefs and fear-mongering the public. What do you think of that comment, Nick?
It sounds like a guy that took about 7 booster injections.
And I disagree with this. He says it's not his responsibility to share information. We're not violating any ethics here because we're not pointing out that the clot came out of Mrs. Jones or Mr. Smith. And also, embalmers, they are legally obligated if they find like a gun shot wound or a stab wound in a corpse, they have to notify the police about that. I think in a similar vein, they have an ethical responsibility to notify the authorities when they see something unusual in corpses that they've never seen before. And these embalmers, like I said, they have 20 or 30 years of experience. They've never seen these white fibrous clots until the years of COVID and the vaccines. So the next one here from Virginia says, I'm finding a lot of white rubbery clots and have been taking pictures of them, but it's become the new normal. I don't use a drain tube anymore because of all the clots, blood clots and the fibrous white ones. My angular forceps is my go-to instrument to help remove them. I'm thinking back to that Canadian embalmer we just mentioned. What does he think about the 83% of the embalmers that responded to this survey saying they're seeing the white fibrous clots? Is he calling all 83% of them liars, those 250 embalmers? It seems like he's calling them liars,
I guess so.
I depend on all the embalmers that respond to all my surveys to provide me the truth. So I take every answer I get, whether it's a pro or a con, and I don't judge them. I just take them and gather the data. And that's what, my job is to do, then report it. So let's hop out of here. We can hop into our second survey if you want to.
Well, I'll tell you, just that survey is absolutely, confirms that this phenomenon is indeed happening. That's just too high of a prevalence to say, oh, it's just something else. It's just, they've always been seeing them, because I know they make those arguments like, oh, those are just normal clots. But now that corroborates you is, like you said, Greg Harrison's work, who's now looked at them, Kevin McCarran's work, looked at them under the microscope, and it's not even blood. It's literally misfolded protein. So it literally is something new, something we haven't seen before.
Absolutely. And I cannot bring myself to believe that 250 embalmers would have a sick joke to try to pretend something's a hoax and answer a survey saying something's happening when it's not. So I believe them. I believe the 250 that said they're seeing this phenomenon. And I know that for a fact because I have visited with Richard Hirschman. I've actually got my own vials of the clots that he's provided to me. So I know this phenomenon is actually happening. And I've just run into too many embalmers that say that it indeed is. Like I said, with the president of the Ohio Embalmers Association, he's admitted it. Kevin Swire, who's the president of the Manitoba, Canada Funeral Service Association, has contacted me saying that he's seen the white fibrous clots as well. And he's in Winnipeg, and he's the president for the entire province of Manitoba. And then Chris Calvi, who's the president of the Pennsylvania Funeral Directors Association. Chris sent me an email last fall saying, hey, nearly every person that I embalm is not getting good distribution to one or both of the hands below the elbow. So there's problems there. The embalmers want to make sure that the face looks good and the hands look good, because those are the two of the most visible things in the casket, right, when they're preparing a body for a viewing. So he's been frustrated not being able to get the fluid down into the hands due to blockage. So we know it's happening from very well-respected people around the world. Now, what's interesting, Nick, is speaking of well-respected people, I was contacted last March by actually a mutual colleague of Dr. Peter McCullough, Dr. Dan McDyer, who's an OBGYN in Jacksonville, Florida. And Dan actually has co-written, I think, a paper with Dr. McCullough last year about whether or not the vaccines are safe for women in pregnancy. And I think their conclusion is absolutely not. But Dan introduced me to a endovascular specialist and cardiologist also in Jacksonville, Florida. However, this gentleman does not want to be named, so I won't name him on the podcast here. But he's admitted to me, Nick, that he's been pulling the same white fibrous clots out of living people for the last 4 years in what's called a cath lab. A cath lab is short for catheterization lab, and it's a place where living people go to have clots removed. Before 2020, it was typically your grape jelly clots and maybe some chicken fat clots. But now these cath labs are having to deal with these real tough, large, rubbery, white fibrous clots. So it's a whole new ball game for them.
So they're using different instruments now. They can't even use the same instruments they used to use because these things are in there. That's telling.
Yeah. So, but interestingly, about a month after I made contact with this gentleman, he sent me another email saying, I've been instructed to terminate all communications immediately. Sorry for the inconvenience. So somebody got to him. I'm guessing maybe up in his hospital chain or something. So, but what it did do is it gave me the idea to try to run a survey with vascular surgeons and endovascular specialists, cardiologists, cath lab workers around the world. So I developed a survey similar to the one that I did for the embalmers, the 3 that I did for the embalmers. This time, though, I actually asked some questions about the COVID vaccine as well, because unlike the embalmers, these doctors do have access to the COVID vaccination records of all their patients. By the way, Dr. Philip McMillan, who's in the UK, and he does a channel called Vejon Health, VEJON. Philip found his own cath lab whistleblower, a different gentleman, also here in the United States. And that cath lab whistleblower, he did a 52-minute Substack interview with him. You can hear the gentleman's voice, but you can't see who he is. And he's been working in the same cath lab for 20 years. And he's been pulling anywhere between 3 to 10 of these white fibrous clots out of living people every week in his one cath lab alone. Yeah. And like I said, he has access to the COVID vaccination records. He can tell you how many shots they took, when they took their shots, what brand they took. And he said 99% of the time when he finds the white fibrous clots, that person has been jabbed with anywhere between 1 to 8 jabs. And the more they've taken, the worse the clotting seems to be.
Was there any particular brands that had more clotting associated? Did he mention that?
I don't remember Dr. McMillan or Dr. Chetty asking him that question, so that remains a mystery. I suspect it's both. I suspect it's both Pfizer and Moderna. But so based upon that, knowing that my whistleblower, who's gone kind of silent, and this whistleblower, he's also gone kind of silent on Dr. McMillan as well. I said, I'll try to run a survey with the vascular surgeon societies around the world. So I did that. I sent an email with a link to a SurveyMonkey survey built especially for them, and sent it out to the societies for vascular surgery in the United States, Canada, United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand. And none of them responded. I got one response from the Society for Vascular Surgery here in the United States. This is the SVS. And they declined, unfortunately, to participate in the survey. And it's a darn shame because they brag. By the way, they're headquartered in Rosemont, Illinois, and they brag on having over 6,300 member vascular surgeons across the United States. So they could have given us wonderful data, right? They could have told us, hey, are you seeing the white fibrous clots? If you are the people that you're seeing them in, have they taken the vaccine? Are you seeing them in unvaccinated people? They could have told us about brands, about timing, all that kind of information. They have that information. They could have told us that, but they declined to take the survey. So I said, oh boy, now what am I going to do? So I said, well, maybe if I can't get good information from the doctor end, maybe I can get it from the patient end. So I went on Dr. John Campbell's YouTube channel, and he displayed this QR code that you're seeing on the screen here for this people's blood clot survey. So I decided to run a people's blood clot survey for anyone that's had clotting issues or knows somebody that's had clotting issues since January of 2020, because I wanted to catch the year we had COVID, but no vaccines yet as well, and then have them take the survey. I also asked Clayton Morris and his wife Natalie on the show Redacted to also display the code. So they displayed it for me too. And within 2 weeks, Nick, I got over 1,400 responses from people all around the world, from all these places around the world. So the patients are happy to tell you about their blood clotting experience, even though the doctors are staying silent about it.
Right.
So,
the patients were the ones that got battered, injected, injured, and they're suffering. So yeah, they're
exactly.
pissed off.
So as you can see there on the screen, they came from countries all over the world, thanks to Dr. Campbell and Clayton Morris.
Wow. That's awesome.
We had 1,425 responses. The first question I asked was, have you or anyone that you know had blood clotting issues that started after January of 2020? That's the purpose of the survey. So I'm not sure why the 58 that answered no were even participating, because they shouldn't have taken the survey had they not answered yes. So the real first question of note here was, what years plural, mark all that apply, have you or the person that you know had these blood clotting issues? Well, look at that, Nick. Of the 1,400 people that responded, in the year 2020, only 79 people said they had blood clotting issues that year. That was the year we had COVID, but no vaccines yet. But then look in 2021 going forward. Look how the bars explode. What's that tell you?
That tells me that's when the genetic countermeasures were rolled out and injected into 70% of the population.
Yep, that's what it's telling me as well. So the next question I just flat out asked him, I said, did the person with the clots take the COVID-19 vaccine? Out of the 1,425, almost 1,300 of them, 1,294 said yes, the person took the vaccine. Only 82 said no. There were 45 that didn't know because they were probably answering for somebody else, not themselves. So then I asked him, Mark, what years, Mark, all applied, did the person with the clots take the COVID-19 vaccine? And I had a bar there for for December of 2020, because that's when the shots first rolled out, if you recall. They came out the very last month of 2020. And you see there 196 said yes to that. But then the longest bar, obviously, is 2021 with 1,092. And then the bars start to shrink. And this matches perfectly, right? The booster uptake that we were told by the CDC. Most people got their first 2 jabs in 2021. Then less people took the BA4, BA5 bivalent Omicron booster in 2022. Even less took the XBB 1.5 booster in the fall of 2023. So it just goes down from there. So this starts to give me confidence that the people answering the survey are answering accurately and honestly.
Right.
Matching the
That
CDC.
definitely checks out. Yeah.
So then the next question we asked is, how soon did the person develop the blood clotting issue after taking the COVID-19 vaccine? So this one here, you can say 125 people said less than 2 weeks. 118 said between 2 weeks to a month. 320 said between 1 to 6 months. 217 said between 6 months to a year. And 367 answered greater than 1 year. So this corroborates my theory that it could take 6 to 18 months, maybe even longer, for these white fibrous clots to actually grow inside a person to become to the point where they're actually life-threatening, where they may actually block off a critical blood vessel, artery, or vein.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah, they won't notice it right away. It might still be there, right? Soon after they get it, but yeah, it would take time to do it. And we know now that these vaccine components, even if we say they don't reverse transcribe, which we think they do, but even if they don't, they're now finding this spike protein and mRNA years after last injection.
Yeah.
So this can definitely happen, these delayed adverse events.
And I forgot the young man's name, but there was a case with one young man. His mom went out to visit him in Colorado, I believe, and they were doing a whole week of hiking in the hills and mountains. Pretty rigorous athletic stuff. She flew home I think she was from the eastern part of the United States. Right when she was flying home, he started to feel poorly, went into the hospital, and actually passed away. And this young man was, I think, between 20 and 30 years old. And they found the clots in him. He had felt fine the whole week they were hiking, So that's the danger here, right? These things can be asymptomatic as long as blood's still able to flow around them. You may feel just fine, but then all of a sudden you drop dead. You die suddenly when they become life-threatening.
So they found those fibrous clots in that young adult?
In that young man, that's correct. Man. Yeah, very sad case. Next question we asked is, the blood clotting issue was in what part of the body? Mark all that apply. And as you see there, legs is the number one answer. 593 said legs. Number two answer was lungs, which is kind of scary. Pulmonary embolisms. And 397 said that. What's really interesting about this slide, Nick, is that we know that the CDC has two systems out there. They have the VAERS system, Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. Then they also have another system called VSafe as well, right? That was that downloadable app that people could download on their smartphones to talk about their vaccine experience. And 10 million Americans did download that app to talk about their vaccine experience. What's really shocking, by the way, is 8% of those, as you know, 800,000 of the 10 million actually had an adverse event that was bad enough they either had to go to the hospital, emergency room, urgent care, or schedule a doctor's appointment to resolve the issue. But what that VSafe data also has a free text data field. And not about a year or so ago, Del Bigtree and the folks at the Highwire, his organization ICANN, Informed Consent Action Network, they FOIA'd the CDC. The CDC did not want to turn over that free text data field from VSafe, but a judge made them. He said, oh, yeah, you're going to turn it over. So they've been turning it over to ICANN in tranches of, hundreds of thousands of records until they get to the 10 million, and in the form of Excel spreadsheets. And I've been going through those Excel spreadsheets, and I do a search, Nick, on the term blood clot. And then when I come across it in the Excel spreadsheet, I mark down where the blood clot took place. And guess what? The CDC's own VSafe data, the number one location is legs, followed by lungs, followed by brain, followed by heart. It matches perfectly these 1,400 people that responded to this People's Blood Clot Survey. So again, it gives me great confidence the people answering the survey were doing so accurately and honestly, because their batting order of where the clots are occurring matches perfectly the CDC's own VSafe free text field data.
Wow, that's very interesting for sure. That definitely helps the validity 100%.
Right. So then, of course, the next question is, hey, how is your blood clotting issue resolved? As you can see there, 383 people said it's not resolved yet. They still have the blood clotting issue. The good news is 98 said it went away on its own. Another 416 said they were able to dissolve the clot using clot-busting drugs like tissue plasminogen activator, TPA. And those, by the way, according to the cath lab workers that I've talked to, the one whistleblower I talked to, the TPA does a wonderful job of dissolving the grape jelly clots, traditional grape jelly clots, but it doesn't seem to have any effect at all on these white fibrous clots. So then as you see the next one down, 257 people said that they actually had to have the clot surgically removed, physically removed. And what the doctors do in these cath labs is they use flexible catheters. They go in and they either scrape the clot out, they lasso the clot out and pull it out that way, or they suck it out with a vacuum. So that's the way they get the clots out. The one gentleman that I was talking to, he actually, I saw a procedure on his local Jacksonville TV station where he used a lasso style catheter. You can see the loop at the end of it. And they actually did a 5-minute segment on him getting a DVT, a deep vein thrombosis, out of an older gentleman in that news clip. The funny thing, though, is at the very end of the article, Nick, they didn't show the clot that had been removed. They showed it on the TV camera. They showed the angiograms and everything else, but they never showed the clot. It's like, a fisherman catches biggest fish in the lake ever and then not showing the fish at the end of the article. I think the reason they didn't show it, Nick, is probably because it was a white fibrous clot and there would have been more questions.
Right, that makes sense.
And then, unfortunately, the last thing there, you see 242 people actually died. They didn't get to them in time. That's very sad.
Very disappointing. Yeah, and then that's what everybody needs to realize is that people are actually dying, right? Like these young people, people my age, 30-year-olds, 15-year-olds, they have been killed as a result of these mRNA injections. And so I feel like sometimes, we always forget that, but, and people are still dying. And so, I guess this is just another great time to call again for the immediate market withdrawal of these injections.
Absolutely. And like I said, earlier we saw the slide that the embalmers on average are seeing these in 27% of their corpses. It's, 1 out of 4 dead bodies. So then it brings into question, well, what percentage of the living have them? That's where I would have loved to have had the vascular surgeons and endovascular specialists answer that survey. They could have given us an indication of what percentage of the living are actually having these clots inside them, growing to the point where they then cause that stroke or heart attack. It's just a darn shame they haven't done that. And I think it's unethical that they haven't done that. And if they say that, hey, we don't want to take your survey because you're not a qualified person, it's just a retired Air Force major, well, fine, that's okay. Do your own survey. Survey your own people. Right. Don't let me stop you, right? So then the next question we asked was, if the person's clot was physically removed by a doctor, would you be willing to share that doctor's name? As you can see, there are only 142 of the 1,400 people that responded, Nick. Only about 10% said they'd be willing to share the doctor's name. So I think it's a case where people don't want to get their doctors in trouble.
Right.
Because if you start mentioning, hey, I found this strange clot in this person, and I think the vaccines may have caused it, that can cause trouble for the doctor in question.
Oh, yeah.
Bring unwanted attention. So again, we allowed the people in this survey also to make comments, Nick. And of the 1,400 that responded, actually over 1,100 of them responded with their own stories. 1,100 people. And if you read through the whole list, it's really shocking and very sad. But let me read some of the more spectacular ones to you. Here's one. My mother had 3 COVID vaccines, all Pfizer vaccines. She was healthy and had a stroke and coded in the hospital and died within 5 days. The funeral director is a good friend of the family's and informed us and showed us the white fibrous clots that were throughout her body. He told us they were seeing a lot of these types of clots while embalming. Here's the next one. My mom never had clotting issues before this incident. Then only 2 weeks after receiving the COVID shot, she was taken to the ER for multiple clots that developed in the same arm she received the COVID shot. So you can see there's a case where it developed very quickly. I think it might be able to do both. Here's a comment from somebody inside the system, Nick, a nurse actually that works in a hospital. Surgical nurse, seeing a huge increase in clots. We're doing more amputations than I've seen in my whole career. I'm definitely seeing the clots you're describing. When I say it's probably due to the COVID shot, everyone ignores me and there's silence in the operating room. I also hear the surgeons saying, I've never seen this before. Also, during heart surgeries, the surgeons are having a difficult time suturing as the tissues are just falling apart. Once again, the surgeons are saying, I've never seen anything like this before. A lot of patients are dying. When she's talking about the suturing, about the tissues falling apart, that one of the symptoms we're seeing, there's so much damage going on of the spike protein along the endothelial lining, damaging the walls of your veins and arteries, that is, we believe is creating a condition called vasculitis, where the walls start to collapse. And Dr. Jordan Vaughn, for example, the doctor who has the long vax clinic in Birmingham, Alabama, he's been seeing a lot of that, especially iliac vein compression in his practice. And he's advising a lot of his patients to get stents put in their iliac veins to help shore up the walls of their of the iliac vein, that because he sees it collapsing due to vasculitis from the darn spike protein. We'll go to the next.
They're destroying your veins, they're destroying your arteries, your vessels, they're destroying tissues, and they're contributing to the development of these white fibrous clots. So it's like they're doing multiple through multiple mechanisms. They're causing harm, and it's just a disaster.
It is, and we haven't even touched on turbo cancers and myocarditis, like Dr. McCullough likes to talk about, nerve damage, miscarriages, all kinds of things happening. Yeah, it's been a total catastrophe. This one really shocks me. He says, I was feeling fine, had pain left side below shoulder blade, started sweating and feeling weak. Called the ambulance. ECG did not show heart attack. Rushed to emergency. ECG did not show heart attack. Third different emergency. Doctor did ECG and ultrasound. They were all perplexed. A cardiologist was called. I was sent to a heart institute. Arriving there, I went into cardiac arrest. Was out 2 minutes. 3 sets of compressions and 4 defibrillator shocks were used. They went in through an artery at the wrist. They removed fibrous clot. They did not want to tell me, but a nurse whispered to me, it's the vaccine. We have so many. Follow-up appointment with the cardiologist. I asked the question directly. The doctor looked down and said, I cannot talk about it at the risk of losing my job. What do you think of that one, Nick?
Wow. I mean, so they literally pulled out one of these fibrous clots from his body, and right after he goes into this cardiac arrest. And so I guess what I would say is to these doctors that are, not telling anybody what they're seeing, I don't really sympathize with them, right? They should be telling people the truth. They shouldn't be cowering away in fear, because the more we have, the more people, the more doctors that are scared to say anything, the longer the situation will persist.
I couldn't have said it better myself. We can go ahead and stop there. There's a few more, but they're it just gets sad and more sad when you read them. I've been contacted by so many people. I'm sure you have too, that have been damaged or had loved ones that have been injured or killed by the jabs.
Oh, yes. Too far, too many people.
I forgot to show the audience at the beginning. I have, thanks to Richard Hirschman, has sent me, a sample of the clots. Here's a sample of what they look like in the vial. Richard also gave me a little bit more spectacular version of it as well. Look at that one. That's about a 5.5 inch long clot. It's about 1/2 inch wide. This particular one was taken out of the abdominal aorta. It's one of the largest blood vessels in the body. So, these things are happening. It's really a shame. And the frustrating thing for me, Nick, is, every year that I've had the Embalmer surveys done, I've sent the results to the FDA, CDC, and NIH immediately. And I have heard nothing but crickets for the last 3 years, Nick, from them. In fact, just yesterday, I think I CC'd you on the email I sent. I sent an email. Sasha Latapova put out a Substack saying, hey, we need to get our public comments in for the upcoming vaccine and related biological products advisory committee meeting that's going to take place on the 22nd of May. So I went ahead and I submitted a package with the results of all 3 of my Embalmer survey, the People's Blood Clot survey we just looked at as well, and my data to them, and implored them, please at least suspend these shots, and
hopefully they take that seriously. Hopefully this new administration in there does take the fibrous clot situation seriously. They really should. Like, why don't they just assign somebody, or just a small group to start looking at it? They got to do that. But regarding that FDA meeting, I was hearing that it was bugging out. Like, people were submitting comments, but it hasn't been showing new comments since like a week ago. Have you seen that?
I don't know. I haven't seen that. I know that when I submitted mine yesterday, I did get an FDA tracking number.
Oh, okay. So maybe it's just the site's glitched.
Yeah, so I got a tracking number, and I'll hold them to that. That's one of the things that frustrates me too. And I know there's a big battle going on in our community right now over the Casey Means nomination for Surgeon General, and about where the focus should be. I think you and I and others believe that the focus should be on getting these deadly and injurious vaccines off the market. Nothing wrong with dyes in the food and fluoride in the water and tackling those problems as well. But I think they pale in comparison towards the immediate thing, which is to get these vaccines off the market. So it makes me sad when I see, for example, like here, if you go to the CDC's website here, you still see this is their 24-25 COVID-19 vaccination guidance. And for Pfizer, for children 6 months of age through 4 years of age, they recommend, actually for Moderna, they recommend 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine within the first year of their life. Pfizer, they recommend 3 doses. Can you believe that? Can you imagine bringing your child in at the 6-month mark, getting a dose of Pfizer, coming back 3 weeks later to get a second dose, and then coming back about 8 weeks later to get a 3rd dose, all before the child turns 1 year old?
I can't even imagine that. And honestly, I don't know what even the parents themselves are thinking. They must have lost their minds, or they can't critically think for the life of them. But yeah, these doctors that are physically administering these injections to those 6-month-olds should probably lose their license for doing that, regardless of CDC guidance. I mean, it's just so ridiculous.
And that is that guidance was updated, by the way, on March 14th of 2025. So that's under the RFK Jr. administration, under HHS. So, I'm pinging Bobby as hard as I can. I know you and Dr. McCullough and others are as well. We're pushing hard, and we should push to get these things off the market, not just for infants, but for everybody.
That's the key thing. You're right. So they are definitely, now we've seen, Marty Macri just come out and say, they're probably going to pull them off for kids. But then they leave all these stipulations open, like it could still be available for kids with comorbidities, and it's still going to be available for everyone else. And so, that's not enough, right? These are killing all ages. This is killing grandma. It's killing your brother, your sister, your father, your mother. It's not just killing the 6-month-old, right? And so it's got to get off for everybody. They've killed more than multiple U.S. wars, world wars, more U.S. casualties from these injections. And so they got to get off.
And it also sets the stage. The longer they stay on, the longer Big Pharma gets a footing into future mRNA vaccines, right? For RSV virus and for the regular flu and the bird flu and the shingles. They want to lean on this and use this technology going forward forever. And there's a lot of us in our community who believe that this is just a bad technology, period. They can't control where the shot goes. They said it would stay in your deltoid muscle. It goes all over the body. The lipid nanoparticles go everywhere. They can't control the dosage amount you get, as Dr. McCullough has pointed out, right? Because the mRNA can continually produce spike protein, right? The lipid nanoparticles themselves can be deleterious. They could to people. And then in the case of the COVID vaccines, about 10% of the time it's producing the wrong protein, not the targeted spike protein, but also these frame shifted nonsense or aberrant proteins. So they've just got the whole technology is not ready for prime time. And I would love to just see it go into the scrap heap of history.
I would love to see them go into the incinerator. And you're right, we got to stop it now to prevent it, the whole technology platform and self-amplifying replicon ones from propagating, right? So that it ends here. If it continues to go on, that's their green light to start rolling out these others. So we are at a critical time.
Yeah. Well, and I will get my first look at what the embalmers are seeing in 2025. Like I said, next month when I go to speak to the Tennessee Funeral Directors Association, I'll be running a survey at that conference to do a live survey to see what they're seeing.
Keep me updated on that.
Will do, yeah, because I'm very curious as to what's happening with the white fibrous clots and the microclotting in the first half of 2025.
Yes, I'm very interested to hear that. Well, you know what, Tom? I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing these insights with our audience. Extraordinarily important work. Nobody's doing these surveys. The CDC's not doing it like they should be. So you've carried the load here, and so I'm very thankful. And again, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you want to tell our audience before we end here today?
Just like I said, if people want to follow my work, they can go to my assistant, Laura Kasner, spelled Laura Kasner, KASNER.substack.com. They can see all our work.
Thank you.